Welcome to the Psych Central Show, where each episode presents an in-depth look at issues from the field of psychology and mental health, with host Gabe Howard and co-host Vincent M. Wales.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Psych Central Show podcast. Today we're going to talk about William Morva. He was recently put to death by the state of Virginia, recently as of July 6th, by lethal injection. And what makes this case interesting is that he was a man who is suffering from mental illness, and this well opens up a lot of questions.
It sure does. I suppose the first thing that needs to be asked is, why are we executing people who are mentally ill in the first place?
I'm going to correct you for a moment and say the first question that we have to ask is, why are we executing people in the first place? But
okay, yep, that's fair.
Without falling down the rabbit hole of a political debate about the death penalty, I do personally believe that is wrong, simply because humans are fallible. If you find out that an innocent person was put to death, there's no way to make that right. Mm-hmm. And that bothers me a little bit. But to keep it focused on this person had mental illness, there's that debate of how culpable is a mentally ill person? And is their behavior, their illness, and what they do because of that illness something that should lead to the government executing them? These are big topics.
They really are. There's so many things that we can get into on this, but before we do, let's just talk about his specific case.
Okay, so you have the background in front of you, Vin. His crime was initially jail for armed robbery.
Right, and
that's what kicked this off.
Yes, he was in jail for armed robbery, and then he made an escape attempt, and in the process of that, killed 2 people. So that's what, of course, led to the actual execution. But now, when he was in jail, he was initially diagnosed with schizotypal personality disorder.
Okay, now explain schizotypal personality disorder.
Sure. So, basically it's characterized by severe social anxiety, paranoia, and unconventional beliefs. The thing is, later that diagnosis was changed to delusional disorder. Specifically, now there are many types of delusional disorder, but in his case, his delusions fell into what we call the persecutory type, in that he believed that someone within the jail system wanted him dead. He believed his life was in danger, and that is why he made the escape attempt in the first place.
So in his mind, he was saving his own life by running. Now, of course, the argument to this is that this is just all a bunch of made-up hoopla to explain his crime.
Sure, I know there are certainly people who believe that, yeah.
Well, specifically the people who believe this were the jury at his trial.
Well, the jury wasn't really told the full scope of his mental illness. The jury was told that he had odd beliefs and attitudes, not that he had a mental illness.
But that this didn't rise to the level of mental illness. Now, why do you think that was excluded?
Well, I don't even want to venture on that one. I really don't.
I don't want to guess. Just lack of understanding of mental illness in society, lack of...
Yeah, it's complete, speculation on that regard. But here's something that I find interesting. His brother Michael was also diagnosed with this. He got treatment, and he served his time for, he was charged with assisting with his escape attempt. He got treatment. William did not, but Michael got treatment. He served his time, and he got out of prison, out of jail. So why the difference between the two? Why did one get treatment and the other one did not?
Is there an answer?
Probably somewhere, but it's it's not in my head.
This almost always rises to the level of speculation. The truth is that our justice system is, a bit scattershot. Somebody can murder somebody and get 10 years in prison. Somebody can be found with drugs on them and get 20 years in prison. And for my money, murder is worse. So you can't necessarily go by the sentence to decide. Right. There's just so many things that factor in, the state, the crime, the evidence that they have, the prosecutor involved, the defense attorney involved. Mm-hmm. Then it gets even worse. Socioeconomic class, race, gender.
And on and on and on.
And on and on and on. obviously I tipped my hand at the start of this and said that, look, I just don't think that anybody should be executed. But let's proceed from this point that execution is a reasonable way to handle society's woes and to handle taking care of criminals who are found guilty, which he was. How reasonable is it? And I still get back to this question. I know I asked it already, but how reasonable is it to take a person that does not know right from wrong, that has a diagnosable mental illness, that was running from something, and to hold that person to the identical standard as somebody who had all of their faculties?
Right. Well, let's take a look at the Supreme Court, shall we?
Love the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and back in 2002, the Supreme Court said that, we can no longer execute people who have mental retardation. So they completely prohibited any kind of execution of people who are mentally challenged in that respect. Mental illness, however, is quite the same thing, and we have no such ruling. What we do have is basically an opinion that it's unconstitutional to execute someone who, at the time of the execution, is incompetent.
So not at the time of the crime. If you're incompetent at the time of the crime, but you get medication, treatment, help, 10 years go by, they've made you whole again through medical research,
then you're good to go.
You're good to go.
Yeah. In fact, when Justice Lewis Powell wrote his concurring opinion on that, he stated that, quote, the Eighth Amendment forbids only the execution of those who are unaware of the punishment they are about to suffer and why they are to suffer it. That's pretty simple. I mean, you don't have to be in your right mind to understand you're going to die because you killed somebody. That's pretty straightforward.
The flip side of this, of course, is that we do have 2 homicides. I mean, 2 families lost their loved ones because of this. I mean, that certainly can't go unanswered.
No,
we're debating, of course, the death penalty, if that's reasonable, but I want to be very clear that nobody's saying that because you're mentally ill, you get to kill people, and it's okay as long as you have a diagnosis. That's unacceptable as well. We're specifically talking about the death penalty.
Exactly.
The question that I have is, who does this serve? Does executing a mentally ill man really reduce crime and make us safer? Or does it put us in more danger because, after all, now it's legal to kill sick people?
Well, once again, we have to get back to the whole, is the death penalty right or not? And you and I are in agreement that we don't really care for it at all. So I don't think that anybody is really served by this, except out of some sense of vengeance on the part of those who've lost a loved one.
If I were being perfectly honest with myself, somebody hurts you, Vin, somebody hurts my wife, I'd want revenge as well. It's not that I don't understand the need for revenge. That just can't be the way that we govern.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's move this along. Now, again, in Virginia, the death penalty is perfectly legal. Nothing illegal happened. Everything was by the book. He was represented. He had appeals. He had a trial. He had a jury. Nothing wrong happened. I want to make sure that we're not carrying a flag that his constitutional rights were violated, or the way the laws are written, he was treated fairly, and this was the outcome of this. So the question, I think, in many people's minds are, if he truly was mentally ill, why did we allow this to happen? And the thing that I say to that is, there's no definitive test for mental illness. And I believe, as an advocate, that this is why a lot of people are worried about changing this law. You just need a clever defendant, a clever criminal to say, oh, hey, I was schizophrenic when I fill in the crime. And then there's no way to disprove it, no definitive way to disprove it.
Right.
You think about that while we're on break. We're going to step away for a moment.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp.com. Secure, convenient, and affordable online counseling. All counselors are licensed, accredited professionals. Anything you share is confidential. Schedule secure video or phone sessions, plus chat and text with your therapist whenever you feel it's needed. A month of online therapy often costs less than a single traditional face-to-face session. Go to BetterHelp.com/Psych Central and experience 7 days of free therapy to see if online counseling is right for you. BetterHelp.com/Psych Central.
And we're back. So, Gabe, I think we've said plenty about Mr. Morva's unfortunate situation. Let's talk more in general about the mentally ill in our correction system as a whole.
Oh, listen, people living with mental illness don't fare well in the criminal justice system at all. And I don't mean they don't fare well when they end up there. I mean, there's large amounts of people with mental illness in the criminal justice system because there's just no other place for them to go. I believe that it was dubbed by a well-respected psychiatrist that prisons are the new asylums.
Yeah.
So let's throw out some stats.
Okay.
Per the Treatment Advocacy Center, 20% of inmates in jails have serious mental illness. 15% of inmates in state prisons have serious mental illness. And this is 10 times more than the approximately 35,000 individuals with serious mental illness who are in state hospitals. So as a country, we are treating, housing, paying more attention to people with mental illness in the corrections system than we are in the state hospital system.
Mm-hmm. Pretty sad.
I kind of want to say, what's up with that? I mean, what's up with that? We got sick people in prison. Is this serving society? Is it serving them?
Not well, no. And the mentally ill stay in longer. Their average stays in jails are longer than for those without mental illness. Florida's Orange County Jail, for example, one study showed that the average stay for all inmates is 26 days, but the mentally ill, their average stay was 51 days. On Rikers Island, New York, 42 days in general, but for the mentally ill, 215 days.
What was the conclusion? Why is that?
Well, there are a few factors. One is that the mentally ill find it difficult to understand and follow jail and prison rules. One study, for example, showed that the mentally ill were twice as likely to be charged with rule violations. And another study showed that the mentally ill accounted for 41% of all infractions, even though they were only 19% of the population there. Of course, another reason, too, is that, sadly, they're often held for such a long time because they're waiting for a bed in a psych hospital to open up.
So they're waiting for a bed in a psychiatric hospital in jail.
Yep.
So, for example, if I were waiting for surgery, I should wait in jail.
Well, if you're waiting for surgery and you committed a crime, perhaps, but well, yeah, the sad truth is that that we do have a shortage of psychiatric beds around the country, and it's pretty severe. And we have a lot of people who are waiting and waiting and waiting to be placed. And of course, some are waiting in jails because that's where they happen to end up in the first place, but some are waiting in emergency rooms for them to open up, to get out of the emergency room and into a psych bed, or in general hospital populations when they need a different level of care. And that's a problem we need to address, but that's another show, I suppose.
It's important at this point, I think, to say we're talking about serious and persistent mental illness. You know, schizophrenia, hallucinations, delusions. I mean, we're not talking quirky here. I mean, it's not. I hate to say the pop culture version of mental illness. I mean, we're talking very seriously sick people. The thing that pops into people's brains is, oh, you're faking. You know, the person is faking. And again, I understand that. I don't want somebody to come in and murder my family, pretend that they have schizophrenia, and to walk free. I get it. I understand that. But this so isn't the case.
No,
you don't need to be a trained professional to see that something is off about some of these people. Let's look at some past cases. Pernell Ford was executed in Alabama in the year 2000. During the trial, Ford acted as his own attorney. While presenting his defense, Ford wanted the victims of the crime to be brought into the courtroom so that God could resurrect them. Do we really need psychiatrists and psychologists to observe this person to determine whether or not serious and persistent mental illness is at play?
Yeah, well,
let's talk about Vietnam veteran Manny Babbitt. He was executed by California in 1999. First, he was a veteran, served our country, and you know the details of, you told me about him originally.
Yeah, Manny suffered from PTSD. as a result of his time in the service. Now, the details of his crime indicate that he was having flashbacks to the war. In fact, after he killed his victim, he wrapped her in a blanket and tagged her as if she were a fellow soldier on the battlefield. Now, Babbitt was, he was awarded a Purple Heart for injuries that he sustained. And after his execution, he received a funeral with military honors.
I think this might be the first time that I just don't know what to say. On one hand, he served our country well. On the other hand, what he did was horrible and has no doubt long-lasting effects on a family. I could argue that it's because he didn't get the help that he needed, is how this whole tragedy unfolded. Then he was executed for his crimes, and then he was honored for being a veteran. These are very mixed messages.
Aren't they, though?
As an advocate for people living with mental illness, I talk about this a lot, that we can't just warehouse people living with mental illness in prison. And I understand when society raises their hand and says, look, you're talking about people who have murdered people. They have broken families to the point where they can never be put back together. What do you say to those families when them going to prison will give them peace? And I always say the same thing. What are we doing to make sure this doesn't happen again? Why is there not mental health treatment for people getting out of, the military? We're not even taking care of our veterans. These are our veterans. Mm-hmm. We don't teach, mental health. Basic mental health education isn't provided in most schools in America. People don't understand what to look for. And, we really do have an attitude that this happens in another person's family. So even if we think that our family member might be off, we don't want to do anything about it because we don't want our family members labeled as crazy. So the question that I always push back is, you're right. You're right. Let's do nothing about anything that happened behind us. What are we doing to prevent this tomorrow? No crime has occurred yet. Everybody's still alive. The families aren't damaged. What are we doing to make sure this doesn't happen again? Vin, what are we doing?
Next to nothing that I can see. There are advocates like you and like me and many, many more out there who are pushing for such things, but there's really not much traction that I'm seeing.
Listen, we can do this all day, but I want to talk about this case in particular. Kelsey Patterson was executed in Texas in 2004. Mm-hmm. Now, Patterson had a history of committing violent crimes, but being found incompetent because he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. He voluntarily committed himself to a hospital after one of his crimes. And despite this history and diagnosis, Patterson was found competent to stand trial by jury after 2 murders in 1992. Patterson talked about conspiracies against him during the trial and, et cetera. And even though the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles recommended that Patterson's death sentence be commuted to life, the governor at the time, who is Rick Perry, did not follow the recommendation. Now, there's a lot to dissect here, and I do want to be quick about it. But the first is he had a history of committing violent crimes, mm-hmm. and yet we didn't seem to intercede on his behalf. We didn't offer him treatment that worked. We as a society didn't do what worked.
And he knew things weren't working. He, as you say, he voluntarily committed himself into a hospital after one of his crimes. He knew he was messed up.
And he was still let loose.
Yeah.
Still wasn't given the resources that he needed. Now, they examined it. Now, life in prison was on the table. Mm-hmm. This is important. I want to make sure that people understand this. Nobody was saying, hey, we're either going to give him the death penalty or we're going to let him go back into society.
Sure.
The option was executing a mentally ill man or life in prison for a mentally ill man. Now, life in prison is exactly the greatest place to treat somebody with a long history of mental illness, but hey, I mean, it certainly beats putting a sick person to death. Mm-hmm. That was looked at, that was reviewed by the governor, who said,
nah.
No. Yeah, he said that society would be better served to execute somebody who is sick. And the reason that this, of course, speaks to me is, I am a person living with serious mental illness. Now, I have never been violent, and I hope to never be. But I do worry as an individual that somebody is going to look at the history of my life, the history of my illness, and the stereotypes that they take with them and not offer me the care that I need. And then what? what message does that send to people living with mental illness? And I think the message that it sends is, hey, we don't really care all that much about you.
Yep, certainly easy to take that away.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And remember, you can get 7 days of free, convenient, affordable, private online counseling anytime, anywhere by going to betterhelp.com/Psych Central. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Psych Central Show. Please rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you found this podcast. We encourage you to share our show on social media and with friends and family. Previous episodes can be found at psychcentral.com/show. PsychCentral.com is the internet's oldest and largest independent mental health website. Psych Central is overseen by Dr. John Grohol, a mental health expert and one of the pioneering leaders in online mental health. Our host, Gabe Howard, is an award-winning writer and speaker who travels nationally. You can find more information on Gabe at gabehoward.com. Our co-host, Vincent M. Wales, is a trained suicide prevention crisis counselor and author of several award-winning speculative fiction novels. You can learn more about Vincent at vincentmwales.com. If you have feedback about the show, please email talkback@psychcentral.com.